This watch on my wrist is worth more than your entire farm," mocked the millionaire CEO, Ottavio, humiliating the poor farmer who was dirtying the carpet of his luxury jewelry store in São Paulo. Tired of wasting time, he ordered the guards to throw him out. The old man then opened his old, worn suitcase on the counter and said, "I'll take the entire showcase." Ottavio laughed loudly until he looked inside the suitcase and the smile disappeared from his face. The air in Oliver's Rodeo Drive boutique was thin and expensive. Every inch of the space had been meticulously designed to both intimidate and seduce, a modern cathedral erected in honor of luxury. The Italian marble, a glacial white, reflected the soft light from LED spotlights embedded in the plaster ceiling, making the jewelry displayed in armored crystal cases look like captured stars. Oliver, the master of this universe, felt the power emanating from every detail. This wasn't just a business. It was the materialization of his success, the irrefutable proof of his superiority. His net worth wasn't just what was in the bank, but the empire he had built with his own hands. He moved between the counters with the confidence of a king in his domain, his English linen suit impeccably tailored, the subtle scent of an exclusive cologne lingering in his wake. That afternoon, his focus was on a particularly important client, an industrial magnate whose Wall Street investments were legendary. On the black velvet of the counter lay the centerpiece of their conversation, a platinum timepiece, its dial entirely paved with diamonds that glittered like liquid fire. "A true work of art," Oliver murmured, his voice a calculated velvet. "A piece that doesn't just mark time, but defines it." He knew the magnate wasn't buying a watch, but a symbol, a testament to his own fortune. And that's what Oliver sold: symbols, status, the tangible feeling of being above common mortals. It was then that the soft chime of the front door sounded, a dissonant note in the controlled symphony of the place. Oliver looked up, irritation already forming on his polished expression, and saw him, a figure who did not belong in this setting. An old man, bent by time but with a steady gaze. His boots were caked in a red clay dust that stained the immaculate marble with every step. He wore simple cotton trousers and a faded plaid shirt. On his head, a battered straw hat, and in one hand, an aged leather suitcase with dull, worn metal buckles. The man stopped in the center of the boutique, his eyes slowly scanning the room, not with admiration, but with a kind of quiet assessment. He ignored the smaller pieces, the delicate earrings and discreet rings, and fixed his gaze on the main display case, the sanctuary where Oliver exhibited his most spectacular creations, jewels whose value could buy entire blocks in less affluent neighborhoods. The old man pointed a wrinkled, calloused finger at the glass. His voice, when he finally spoke, was raspy, as if dragging the sound from the very earth that covered his boots. "How much?" He paused, his gaze sweeping over the entire glittering contents of the case. For all of it, the question hung in the air, absurd, displaced. The magnate next to Oliver frowned in confusion. The employees, trained in discretion, froze at their posts. Oliver felt a wave of heat rise up his neck. The audacity of this man was an insult, a stain on his tapestry of perfection. He cut the sale short, his politeness evaporating like water in the desert. With firm, deliberate steps, he marched toward the old man, the sound of his Italian leather shoes echoing in the tense silence. He stopped inches from the man, looking him up and down with a contempt he barely bothered to hide. "Friend, I think you've taken a wrong turn," Oliver said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The farmer's market is a few blocks over." To emphasize his point, he raised his own wrist, displaying a solid gold watch, a piece worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. "This watch alone is worth more than your entire farm. Please, don't waste my time." "Security," he called, without even glancing toward the door. "Please escort this gentleman out." The humiliation was a public spectacle, cold and sharp. The magnate looked away, embarrassed. The nearest saleswoman shrank back. The security guard, a burly man, began to move slowly in their direction. The old man, however, did not move. He showed no anger, no shame. There was a disconcerting serenity on his lined face. With a calm that defied the tension in the room, he walked to the main counter, the same one where Oliver was conducting his $1 million sale. Ignoring the jeweler completely, he placed his old suitcase on the polished glass. The sound of worn leather against crystal was the only thing that broke the silence. Oliver crossed his arms, a mocking smile forming on his lips, expecting the old man to pull out a block of cheese, perhaps some fruit to try and sell. But when the metal buckles were opened with a soft click and the lid was lifted, Oliver's smile froze on his face. Oliver's smile didn't fade. It shattered, like a thin mirror struck by a stone. His eyes, once sparkling with arrogance, were now fixed, glazed, trying to process the sight within the leather suitcase. There was no cheese, no fruit, none of the rustic wares his prejudiced mind might have imagined. The inside of the suitcase was lined with a dark red velvet, faded by time, and resting upon it, as if they had sprouted from the earth itself, were dozens of raw stones. They didn't sparkle like the polished diamonds in his display cases. They pulsed with an inner light, a deep, luminous green that seemed to hold the soul of an ancient forest. Some were as small as pebbles, others the size of a clenched fist. Their irregular, imperfect shapes, a testament to a wild and powerful origin. The silence in the boutique became heavy, dense. The air conditioning seemed to have failed. Oliver felt the blood drain from his face, a wave of cold running down his spine. He knew gemstones. His entire life, his fortune, and his status were built on the knowledge of gems, and he recognized those stones, the color, the purity, the energy that emanated from them. They were a myth, a legend whispered among the world's top dealers, the kind of wealth not measured in mere dollars or euros, but in power. It was the magnate, the client Oliver had been courting, who broke the spell. He stepped closer, his eyes wide, and a gasp of air escaped his lungs. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "Those are Cougar's Eye emeralds. From the Cougar's Eye mine." The name fell like a bomb in the silent jewelry store. The Cougar's Eye emeralds were more than rare. They were considered extinct, a deposit depleted for decades, whose few remaining stones belonged to private collections and museums. Their legends, the magnate continued, forgetting Oliver, speaking as if before a sacred relic, worth more than diamonds. Silas, unfazed by the commotion, reached his calloused hand into the suitcase and picked up one of the larger stones. Its surface was rough, but the green light within seemed to dance. With deliberate slowness, he placed it on the glass counter, next to the diamond-paved platinum watch that Oliver had been displaying with such pride moments before. The contrast was brutal. The watch, once the pinnacle of luxury and human engineering, suddenly seemed small, artificial, almost vulgar next to the raw, timeless beauty of the emerald. Silas raised his eyes to meet Oliver's. "This watch is worth my farm," you said. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, a low, dry chuckle that grated on Oliver's nerves. "Son," he said, tapping the green stone with the tip of his finger, "this stone in my hand is worth the entire building your boutique is in." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "I'm Silas. But some folks call me the Emerald King. I own the mine." Oliver felt the floor disappear from under his feet. The man's words echoed in his mind, each syllable a hammer shattering the foundations of his world. The Emerald King, a reclusive billionaire, an almost mythical figure in the world of high finance, whose net worth was a mystery but was known by all to be astronomical. He didn't play the stock market, didn't worry about funds or portfolios. He was the source. He owned the treasure. "I came to buy a wedding gift for my daughter," Silas continued, his tone now casual, as if discussing the weather. He began to close the suitcase, the movement slow and methodical. But honestly, I don't care for your service. The click of the metal buckles closing sounded like a prison cell door to Oliver. I think I'll buy your competitor's store, and their building too. Without another word, Silas picked up his suitcase, turned, and walked toward the door with the same calm with which he had entered, leaving behind a trail of humiliation and the ghost of an unimaginable fortune. Oliver remained motionless, a statue of pale marble, unable to breathe, to think. He hadn't just lost the biggest sale of his life. In that instant, he realized he had been measured, weighed, and by his own arrogance, found wanting. The chime of the door as it closed was the final blow, and in his mind, a single question began to spin over and over like a broken record. What have I done? The silence that followed Silas's departure was different. It wasn't the reverent quiet of a luxury temple, but the heavy vacuum that follows an explosion. Oliver remained behind the counter, his hands flat on the cold glass as if for support. His mind, normally a machine for calculating profits and dividends, had crashed. The Emerald King's words ricocheted inside his head. Worth the entire building. He glanced at the magnate beside him, searching for some sign, some denial. But the man was staring at him with an unreadable expression, a mixture of pity and contempt. I didn't know, Oliver stammered, his voice sounding alien to his own ears. The magnate shrugged, a small gesture, but loaded with meaning. No one knew he was in L.A., Oliver. But everyone who matters knows who he is. He adjusted his collar, his interest in the platinum watch completely gone. Arrogance is an expensive liability in business. With that final judgment, he turned and left, leaving Oliver to sink deeper into his own disaster. The door chimed for the second time, each note a death knell for his reputation. The employees, who had been pretending to polish cases and arrange non-existent displays, now watched him from the corners of their eyes. He could feel the weight of their gazes, the morbid curiosity, the whispers that would start as soon as he turned his back. He, Oliver, who demanded perfection, who fired staff for a crease in their uniform, had made the most amateurish mistake of all. He had judged a book by its cover. And the book, in this case, was a priceless first edition. The humiliation was a burning ember in his chest. It wasn't just the loss of money, of the monumental sale that could have redefined his fiscal year. It was the annihilation of his image. The story would spread like wildfire. Through Beverly Hills, the exclusive country clubs, the boardrooms where his name was synonymous with success. He would be the jeweler who insulted the Emerald King, the man who mistook a billionaire for a farmer, the fool who, blinded by his own vanity, had dismissed a fortune. The thought made his stomach churn. He backed away from the counter, strength leaving his legs, and nearly stumbled on his way to his office in the back. He closed the solid mahogany door and leaned against it, finally allowing himself to take a deep breath. The office was his sanctuary, the walls adorned with certificates of authenticity, photos with celebrities, and charts showing the meteoric rise of his capital. But now it all seemed hollow, a sham. What was the point of all this accumulated wealth if he could be so easily dismantled by a single error in judgment? He sank into his Italian leather chair, his head in his hands. The image of the suitcase opening, revealing that green treasure, was seared into his retinas. He thought of the man's words, "Came to buy a wedding gift for my daughter." A daughter, a bride, an event that demanded the best. And he had offered the worst of himself. The opportunity wasn't just commercial, it was personal. He could have connected with one of the most powerful and reclusive families in the country, a deal that would have generated a legacy. Instead, he had built a wall with bricks of arrogance. A wave of desperation hit him. He had to fix this. He had to find Silas, apologize, beg. But how? The man was a legend precisely because he was unreachable. He had no address, wasn't listed anywhere. He was a ghost with a net worth that rivaled small countries. Oliver lifted his head and looked through the blinds of his office into the boutique. His team was trying to return to normal, but the tension was palpable. The saleswoman, who had witnessed everything up close, Laura, a young woman he had always considered efficient but insignificant, seemed particularly shaken. She kept glancing at the door, as if expecting the old man to return. It was then that a tiny memory, a detail lost in the whirlwind of humiliation, surfaced in his mind. The magnate had mentioned something, a name, Cougar's Eye Emeralds, from the Cougar's Eye Mine, Cutter's Gap, in North Carolina, a forgotten place on the map, known only to those who trafficked in green dreams. It was a thread of hope, as thin as a spider's web, but it was all he had. The idea was insane, impulsive, a complete deviation from his calculated life. But the image of Silas closing the suitcase and turning away haunted him. That wasn't a door closing on a sale, it was a door closing on his future. He knew, with a terrible clarity, that he couldn't let the story end like this. He had to rewrite the ending, and to do that, he would have to leave his marble temple and dive into the world of red clay dust from which that fortune and his ruin had emerged. The decision, once made, solidified into a feverish urgency. Oliver was not a man of impulse. Every step of his life had been a calculated investment aimed at maximum returns. Yet the wound to his pride was so deep that his usual logic had become irrelevant. He was no longer thinking of profit or loss in terms of money, but of a different, far more volatile kind of capital, respect. He spent the rest of the afternoon locked in his office, his mind racing. Cutter's Gap. The name sounded rustic and distant, a dusty spot on the vast map of North Carolina. His first instinct was to use his resources. He called contacts, activated informants who, for the right price, could locate anyone. But the name Silas, the Emerald King, was met only with whispers and dead ends. No one had a number, an address. The man was a shadow, and his power lay precisely in his invisibility. Frustration mounted. He, Oliver, who could get a table at the most exclusive restaurant with a single phone call, who had the personal numbers of bankers and politicians, was powerless. It was like trying to grasp smoke. It was then that he realized his mistake. He was trying to find the king in his own world, the world of asphalt, contracts, and electronic transfers. But Silas belonged to another universe, one of red clay and open sky. To find him, Oliver would have to leave his fortress. He would have to go there. The thought filled him with a dread he hadn't felt in years. He was a city man, a man of concrete. His life was air conditioning, imported mineral water, and thousand-thread-count sheets. The Appalachian Mountains, in his imagination, were a place of heat, dust, and discomfort, inhabited by people whose lives and values he couldn't comprehend. But the image of the emeralds, pulsing with that green light, and the calm, judgmental gaze of Silas was stronger than his fear. He opened his laptop, and for the first time, he didn't search for the price of gold or the performance of his stocks. He typed Cutter's Gap, North Carolina. The images that appeared were of a small town with simple streets and colorful houses. Photos of men with sun-weathered faces, smiling, displaying green stones in their palms. A world completely alien to his. He needed a plan. He couldn't just show up there as a Beverly Hills millionaire looking for a ghost. He'd be eaten alive. He needed a reason, a disguise. It was then that his gaze fell on a photo on his desk. A younger him, next to his grandfather, an Italian immigrant who had started his life in America as a simple jewelry artisan, long before Oliver's empire existed. His grandfather spoke passionately about stones, not for their dollar value, but for their history, the soul each one carried. He used to travel to the rural parts of the country, into the mountains, searching for unique gems, treating the miners with respect, listening to their stories. Oliver had always considered these trips a romantic eccentricity, an outdated business model. Now, he saw in them a strategy. He wouldn't go as the arrogant owner of the Rodeo Drive boutique. He would go as a buyer, a student of gems, the grandson of an old artisan. Seeking rare stones and the stories behind them. It would be a lie, of course, but a lie anchored in a forgotten truth. A truth about his own roots, which he had buried under layers of marble and arrogance. He began the preparations. He bought a flight to Charlotte, and from there planned to rent a car for the long drive into the heart of the mountains. Instead of his linen suits, he bought jeans, simple shirts, and a pair of sturdy boots that felt strange and heavy on feet accustomed to soft leather shoes. As he packed his bag, he felt like an actor preparing for a role. Each piece of simple clothing was part of the costume. He left behind his expensive watches, his gold cufflinks, everything that screamed his wealth. He kept only one object from his former self, a small notebook of his grandfather's, filled with sketches of stones and notes on American mines. He found it in an old box, a remnant of a heritage he had never valued. As he flipped through the yellowed pages, he felt an odd connection to the man he had barely known. Leaving the boutique at the end of the day, he paused for a moment and looked at the main display case, now seeming strangely empty despite being full of jewels. The sparkle of the diamonds seemed cold and lifeless compared to the memory of the emeralds, deep green. Laura, the saleswoman, was tidying the counter. She looked up and saw him, and for the first time, he noticed something in her gaze that wasn't deference or fear. It was a kind of curiosity, almost pity. "Mr. Croft, are you all right?" she asked, her voice low. He just nodded, unable to form a reply. "I'm going away for a few days," he said, more to himself than to her, "to take care of some business." As he walked down Rodeo Drive toward his car, the Los Angeles night air had never felt so artificial. He looked at the windows of the other designer stores, at the people dressed in calculated elegance, and felt like a stranger. The world he had dominated now seemed like a gilded cage, and he was about to leave it, heading for unknown territory, driven not by the pursuit of more wealth, but by a desperate need for redemption. And he had no idea if he would find it, or if he would just lose himself completely in the process. The transition between worlds was brutal. The flight to Charlotte was the last bubble of his familiar reality, a cocoon of air conditioning and polite service. But the moment he stepped off the plane and the humid North Carolina heat enveloped him like a heavy blanket, Oliver felt he had crossed an invisible border. The air smelled different, a mix of pine, damp earth, and blooming honeysuckle. The sounds were different. The twang of a bluegrass song leaking from headphones, the lilting drawl of the announcements, a vernacular that sounded like music to his unaccustomed ears. At the rental car counter, he felt clumsy in his new clothes. The jeans felt stiff, the boots disproportionate. The agent smiled at him, a genuine smile that expected nothing in return, and it disarmed him. He was used to smiles that were part of a transaction, a prelude to a request or a sale. The drive into the mountains was a gradual immersion into the unknown. The urban landscape of Charlotte, with its skyscrapers and chaotic traffic, gave way to a verdant countryside with rolling hills and vast tobacco fields. But the farther west he drove, the more the landscape transformed. The manicured green became wilder, replaced by the dense forests of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The multi-lane highway became a two-lane road, and then stretches of gravel that made the rental car shudder, kicking up clouds of red clay dust, the same red clay that had caked Silas's boots. Oliver drove with tense concentration, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The silence inside the car was filled only by the hum of the engine and his own breathing. Outside, the world was vast and empty. He felt small, insignificant before this immensity. The sun was relentless, and the car's air conditioning seemed a fragile defense against the force of nature. He stopped at a small roadside diner, a simple building with clapboard siding and a tin roof. As he entered, all eyes turned to him. They were men with sun-beaten skin, with thick hands and worn clothes. Oliver felt the old instinct of superiority stir, but he suppressed it. He was the stranger here. He ordered a plate of food and a bottle of water, his voice sounding too formal for the setting. The food was simple: pulled pork, cornbread and collard greens, but it had an authentic, real flavor that surprised him. As he ate, he listened to the conversations around him. They talked about the drought, the price of timber, about a new vein that promised good color. No one talked about stocks, hedge funds, or crypto. Wealth here took a different, more tangible form. It was the rain that fell from the sky, the calf born in the pasture, the green stone that sprouted from the earth. He took his grandfather's notebook from his backpack and placed it on the table. One of the older men, sitting at the next table, glanced at the notebook with curiosity. "That's a fine-looking book." Old Oliver saw an opening. "It was my grandfather's," he replied, trying to keep his voice casual. "He was an artisan, liked to travel through here, looking for stones." The man smiled, a smile that revealed a few missing teeth. "Your granddaddy had good taste. This land gives up a lot, good things and bad." "I'm on my way to Cutter's Gap," Oliver said, testing the waters. The name seemed to change the atmosphere. The man straightened in his chair. "Cutter's Gap," he repeated, his tone now more serious. "Tough folk up there, and a lot of emeralds. But the best ones already have an owner." "An owner?" Oliver asked, his heart quickening. "Just one," the man said, lowering his voice. "The king. Nobody messes with what's his. Nobody even sees him. But everyone knows he's there, watching over his own." The confirmation of Silas's existence and power was like a punch to the gut. He was on the right path, but he was also entering a territory that was, in every sense, a kingdom. A kingdom ruled by a man he had publicly humiliated. Back on the road, the sun began to set, painting the sky with vibrant shades of orange and purple that Oliver had never seen in Los Angeles. The beauty was overwhelming, but also melancholic. He felt increasingly far from home, not just in distance, but in spirit. As night fell, he finally saw the lights of Cutter's Gap on the horizon. Not the illuminated skyscrapers of his city, but a cluster of faint, yellow lights twinkling in the darkness of the mountains. Driving down the main street, he felt as if he had traveled back in time. The town was small, the streets dusty, people sitting in rocking chairs on their front porches, talking under the weak light of the street lamps. He found the town's only inn, a charming old two-story house. As he checked in, the owner, a woman with lively eyes, examined him with curiosity. "Don't get many tourists this way. Come to see the mines." "Something like that," Oliver replied. "I came looking for stories." In his simple but clean room, he looked at himself in the spotted mirror. The man looking back was covered in dust, his hair disheveled, his face tired. He didn't recognize the imposing figure from Rodeo Drive. That man didn't exist here, and for the first time, he wondered who he was without his suit, his watch, and his fortune. The question left a terrifying emptiness in his chest. The first morning in Cutter's Gap began with the crowing of a rooster, a sound so alien to Oliver that for a moment he thought he was dreaming. The air coming through the wooden window of the inn room was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of brewing coffee and pine. He dressed in the simple clothes he had bought, feeling more and more like an imposter in this setting. He went down for breakfast, served in a small courtyard with potted ferns and a red-painted concrete floor. The innkeeper, Martha, set a hearty table before him. Grits, scrambled eggs, biscuits with gravy, and strong, sweet coffee. "You eat up now, son," she said with a motherly smile. "Can't get far on an empty stomach, and the sun in these hills don't play." Oliver ate in silence, watching the small town begin to stir. Men on pickup trucks kicking up dust, children in backpacks heading to school, shopkeepers unlocking their doors. There was a simplicity, a rhythm of life that contrasted violently with the frantic urgency of Los Angeles. He knew he couldn't just ask for Silas's location. The name King was spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. He had to be subtle, build his character, the grandson of an artisan searching for gems and stories. After breakfast, he took his grandfather's notebook and began to walk through the town. His plan was to visit the small-time gem dealers, the middlemen who bought from the local miners and sold to larger buyers. He entered the first shop, a small, stuffy room with dusty display cases showing emeralds of varying quality, most of them small and cloudy. The owner, a suspicious man with small, watchful eyes, sized him up from head to toe. Oliver used the story he had rehearsed. He spoke of his grandfather, showed the drawings in the notebook, asked about the local stones, praising the color and purity of a few of them. He didn't talk about buying in bulk, only about understanding the soul of the stone. The man's suspicion eased slightly. "The real good stones, they don't stay in town," he said, his voice low. "They go straight from the mine to buyers from out of state. Don't even pass through here." Oliver repeated the process at 2 other shops, with similar results. He was treated with cautious politeness. But no one gave him concrete information. He learned about the different types of rock formations, about the dangerous work of the miners, about the luck that dictated everyone's life there. But the figure of Silas remained like an invisible wall. It was as if the entire town was part of a pact of silence to protect its patron. Late in the morning, feeling frustrated, he went into a tavern for a bottle of water. The place was dark and cool. Sitting at a table in the corner, an older man was cleaning some raw stones with a piece of flannel. He had the hands of someone who had worked the earth his whole life, but his eyes had a clarity and intelligence that caught Oliver's attention. Oliver approached, using the same tactic. "Excuse me, those are beautiful stones." The man looked up, assessed him for a long moment, and then, to Oliver's surprise, he smiled. "You're not from around here." "No," Oliver admitted. "I came from Los Angeles. My grandfather was passionate about the stones from this region." He showed him the notebook. The old man took the book with surprising care, flipping through the yellowed pages with a kind of reverence. "I remember a man like that, years ago. An Italian fella. He didn't just look at a stone's value. He looked at its story." Oliver's heart leaped. "You knew him?" "I was just a boy. My daddy was a miner. This man, your grandfather maybe, he'd talk with us, eat with us, treated us like folks, not like some of the others." The man's name was Elias. He was a retired miner who now lived off small deals and the wisdom life had given him. They talked for over an hour. Oliver didn't ask directly about Silas. Instead, he asked about life in the mines, about the legends, about the most famous stones ever found there. Elias spoke of the Cougar's Eye mine. He spoke of it like a living thing, a capricious entity that gave its wealth to a chosen few. "Many a man died from greed over that mine," Elias said. "But the mine chose its owner. Or maybe he understood it. I don't rightly know." "And who is the owner?" Oliver asked, as casually as he could. Elias looked at him, his wise eyes seeming to see right through his facade. "The owner is the one who takes care of it, who doesn't take more than the land can give, who understands that the greatest wealth isn't the gold or the emeralds, but the water that quenches the people's thirst and the food on the workers' table." Elias's words were like a riddle, but Oliver understood the message. Silas wasn't just a billionaire. He was a leader, a protector of this community. His humiliation of him had not been an insult to one man, but to everything he represented. I made a mistake with a man from here," Oliver confessed, his voice low, feeling that only honesty could break the barrier, a grave mistake, and I need to fix it. Elias was silent for a long time, studying Oliver's face. The desperation and regret in his eyes must have been genuine. A mistake, young man, is sometimes the start of the right path, Elias said finally. Mr. Silas goes up to the chapel on the hill, just outside of town, every Friday at sundown. He don't go to pray, he goes to talk to the saint, or maybe to his wife, who's buried there. The information was delivered simply without fanfare. It was the key Oliver had been looking for, the door he needed to open. He thanked Elias, gratitude overflowing in his voice. As he left the tavern, the midday sun was high and harsh, but Oliver barely felt it. He had a destination. He had a chance. But what would he say? How could a man like him, who only knew the language of numbers and material goods, apologize to someone who seemed to measure wealth with a completely different ruler? The anxiety was a knot in his stomach, tighter and more real than any concern over his company's cash flow. Friday arrived with torturous slowness. For Oliver, each passing hour was another grain of sand in the hourglass of his anxiety. He barely ate, barely slept. He spent the day wandering the streets of Cutter's Gap, distractedly returning the greetings of locals who were already getting used to his presence. He was no longer the strange tourist, but that fella from L.A. who liked stones. Little did they know that the only stone he cared about now was the one he needed to remove from his own chest. As the afternoon sun began to lose its strength, painting the sky in softer hues, Oliver felt it was time. With his heart hammering against his ribs, he began the walk toward the hill at the edge of town, following the dirt path Elias had pointed out to him. The climb was steep, and the thin mountain air made him short of breath. With every step, his boots kicked up the familiar red dust. He felt like a pilgrim ascending to an altar, not to ask for a miracle, but to confess a sin. At the top of the hill, the chapel was just as he'd imagined. A small, humble building, whitewashed a shade that the sun had begun to peel, with a simple wooden cross on its roof. Beside it, under the shade of a lone tree, was a small family cemetery with just a few headstones. And there, with their backs to him, were two figures. One was unmistakable, the silhouette of Silas, with his straw hat. The other was a young woman, slender, with dark hair tied in a simple bun. She was standing next to a single grave, the only one with fresh flowers. Oliver froze, his entire body chilled despite the heat. The daughter, the reason for all of this. He couldn't interrupt. This was an intimate, sacred scene. He ducked behind an outcropping of rock, planning to wait for them to leave, but the gentle breeze carried fragments of their conversation to him, and the words rooted him to the spot. "Dad, you don't understand," the young woman's voice said, soft but filled with an infinite sadness. "It's not the jewels, it's not the party, it's not a gift that will fix things." Oliver felt a punch to the gut. He saw Silas's shoulders slump, a gesture of defeat that completely belied the image of the powerful Emerald King. This was just a father, anguished before his daughter. "But my child, Helena," Silas said, his voice raspy, not with authority but with a plea. "I just want to see you happy. I thought a gift, something to mark the moment." "The moment is already marked, Dad. But not in the way you think," she interrupted, her voice choked with emotion. "What's the good of having the most expensive jewel in the world around your neck if your heart is empty?" In that instant, the scale of his error hit Oliver with the force of a tidal wave. His humiliation, his desperate journey, the lost sale. It was all so small, so insignificant. He hadn't just insulted a billionaire, he had stumbled into the middle of a family drama, into the silent pain between a father and a daughter, and turned a man's clumsy attempt to reach his child's heart into a stage for his own petty vanity. He felt a shame so profound it left him breathless. He had to get out of there, disappear. He turned as carefully as possible to retreat, to leave them their privacy. But his foot, unaccustomed to the uneven ground, slipped on a loose rock. He lost his balance, and to keep from falling, his hand shot out and grabbed a dry branch of a bush, which snapped with a sharp crack. The sound, dry and loud in the late afternoon silence, was like a gunshot. Father and daughter spun around in a single motion, their startled eyes fixed on the shadow where Oliver was hiding. Oliver's world shrank to the size of that sound. For an eternal moment, the three of them remained frozen, like figures in an old photograph. The setting sun cast long shadows that stretched across the dirt ground, and the soft breeze that had carried fragments of conversation now seemed to carry the weight of the silence. Silas's face, once marked by paternal pain, hardened into a mask of suspicion and contained fury. His eyes, which in the boutique had seemed merely tired, now sparked with the protective light of a guardian. Beside him, Helena flinched instinctively, her startlement giving way to a look of vulnerability and hurt, as if this intrusion were just another layer of pain on an existing wound. There was nowhere left to run, no character left to play. Oliver stepped forward, emerging completely from behind the rocks, his hands raised in a universal gesture of surrender. He was the trespasser, the profaner of a sacred moment, and the knowledge of it crushed him. I'm sorry." His voice came out weak, a whisper swallowed by the vastness of the place. I wasn't trying to listen. I swear." Silas took a step forward, placing himself between Oliver and his daughter. "You?" he said, his voice low and dangerous, each syllable as heavy as a stone. "The city man. What are you doing here? Did you follow me all this way to laugh some more? To get a closer look at the farm my watch could buy?" The accusation, though predictable, hit Oliver hard. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of that contempt, but the truth, in its desperate complexity, had to be spoken. The words tumbled out, stripped of any artifice, naked of the arrogance that was his second skin. "No, I came to apologize," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the red dirt, unable to meet the eyes of the man he had offended. "What I did in my boutique, it was unforgivable. I was blind, arrogant. I've spent the last few days trying to find you, just to say that I am so sorry." He paused, swallowing hard. "I never should have come up this hill. I never should have interrupted. Please forgive me." The confession hung in the air, sincere in its humiliation. Oliver expected an explosion, an order to disappear, maybe even a physical threat, but Silas didn't explode. Instead, a deep weariness seemed to settle over him, as if anger required an energy he no longer possessed. He looked at the flowered grave, then at his daughter, and finally at Oliver, and let out a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "Forgiveness," he repeated, the word sounding bitter. "You travel 1,000 miles, invade my town, my peace, and climb up to my wife's grave to talk about forgiveness over a lost sale, over your wounded pride? Do you really think your money, your fortune, is the center of the universe, son?" The truth in those words was as sharp as glass. Oliver had no answer. That was it, exactly. He had turned his bruised ego into an epic quest, without a moment's consideration for the lives and pains of the people he was seeking. He was about to turn, to accept defeat and leave, when Helena's voice sounded for the first time, clear and firm, cutting through the tension. "Dad, wait." Silas turned to her, surprised. Helena stepped forward. Her eyes, which Oliver now saw up close, were a deep green, like her father's emeralds, but clouded by an old sorrow. She didn't look at Oliver with anger, but with a strange, searching intensity, as if seeing him not as an intruder, but as an unexpected piece in a puzzle only she knew. "He said he was blind and arrogant," she said, her voice still trembling, but with a new strength. Maybe it takes someone like that to understand." Silas looked at her, confused. "Understand what, my child?" Helena shifted her gaze from her father and fixed it on Oliver. a look that pinned him to the spot, a look that seemed to see straight into his newly discovered insignificance. To understand what it's like to build your entire life on a castle of appearances, she said, her voice little more than a whisper. And then watch it crumble. Helena's words fell into the silence of the hill, not as an accusation, but as a revelation. Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. She wasn't just talking about him. She was talking about herself, about a pain that he, in his selfish quest for redemption, had inadvertently mirrored. A castle of appearances. The phrase defined him with brutal accuracy. His boutique, his suits, his net worth. It was all a fortress built to protect a fragile ego. And now, here, before this young woman whose pain seemed infinitely deeper and more real than his, he saw the cracks in his own walls. Silas looked from Helena to Oliver, confusion and hurt on his face. Helena, what are you talking about? What castle? I gave you everything money can buy, the best education, the best things. And I'm grateful for that, Dad. But you never asked me what I really wanted, she interrupted, her voice gentle but unwavering. She turned to Oliver, and it was to him that she spoke now, as if he were the only one there who could understand the language of her sadness. My fiancé, he doesn't love me. He loves what I represent. He loves the cougar's eye, emeralds, my father's fortune, the power that comes with our name. He's a man like you, she said, without malice, just a weary statement of fact. He lives for the outward shine, for the assets, for the profit. Our marriage isn't a union, it's a merger, a business deal. Helena's confession was an echo of Oliver's own life. He thought of his relationships, always calculated, always with an eye on the social or financial benefit. The women he had dated were like the jewels in his display case, beautiful, with a good pedigree, a reflection of his own success. The idea of love, of a genuine human connection, was an abstract concept, almost a liability on his emotional balance sheet. I tried to tell my father, Helena continued, tears now shining in her green eyes, but he doesn't listen. He thinks he can fix my unhappiness with a gift, with a spectacular jewel. He thinks the answer to the soul's pain lies in the earth's wealth. Silas took a step back, as if he had been physically struck. The pain on his face was that of a father who, in trying to build an empire for his daughter, had instead erected a gilded prison around her. He looked down at his own hands, calloused and strong, the hands that had torn a fortune from the depths of the earth, and they suddenly seemed useless. Oliver, the arrogant jeweler from Beverly Hills, the multi-millionaire focused on assets and cash flow, had become a spectator to a drama that exposed the bankruptcy of everything he believed in. He was a mirror, and the image Helena projected onto him was that of an empty man, surrounded by luxury but devoid of real value. The silence that followed was broken by the soft sound of Helena's weeping. It wasn't loud or desperate, but a quiet sobbing, the overflow of a long-suppressed sorrow. Silas, the Emerald King, the man who commanded a kingdom, looked lost, helpless before his own daughter's tears. He didn't know how to comfort her. His instinct was to offer, to give, to buy. But she had just told him that was useless, in an impulse that came not from his calculating mind, but from a deeper, forgotten place. Oliver stepped forward. He said nothing. He simply took a clean handkerchief from the pocket of his jeans, a habit from his old life that still lingered, and offered it to Helena. It was a small, inadequate, perhaps even presumptuous gesture, but it was the only thing he could offer, a simple, human comfort that had no price tag. Helena looked up, surprised. She hesitated for a moment, then took the handkerchief, her fingers briefly brushing against his. The contact was electric, a current of silent recognition passing between them. In that instant, they were not the jeweler and the heiress. They were just two people who understood the loneliness of living behind a facade. Silas watched the scene, his expression unreadable. The anger had dissipated, replaced by a deep exhaustion and a spark of something new, uncertainty. The man he had despised, the symbol of a superficial world he rejected, had just offered his daughter a comfort he himself had been unable to give. The sun finally set on the horizon, plunging the hill into a soft twilight. The dispute over jewels and humiliation seemed to have happened in another lifetime. Here, in the silence, between a flowered grave and the pain of a broken heart, a new dynamic, fragile and unexpected, had begun to form, and Oliver, for the first time in his life, had no idea what the next step would be, and that, strangely, was the most real feeling he had ever had. Darkness fell quickly on the hill, and with it, a chill that wasn't just from the temperature. The moment of shared vulnerability dissipated, leaving a dense, heavy awkwardness in its wake. Helena dried her eyes with Oliver's handkerchief, folding it carefully before handing it back, a final gesture that sealed the strange pact of understanding between them. No one knew what to say. The apologies had been made, the confessions uttered. All that remained was the chasm of what came next. It was Silas who broke the inertia, his voice sounding tired, stripped of its earlier fury. "It's late, let's head down." It wasn't an invitation, it was a statement of fact. He turned and started down the path with the confidence of someone who knew every stone of the way. Helena followed, but not before casting one last look at Oliver, a look that was a mixture of gratitude and warning. Oliver was left behind, feeling like a ship adrift. Should he leave? Follow them? He didn't belong here, in this pain, but leaving now felt like cowardice, an escape. He chose the only possible path. He followed, keeping a respectful distance. The sound of his footsteps on the loose dirt seeming like a profanity in the night silence. The descent was made in absolute quiet. When they reached the bottom of the hill, an old, sturdy pickup truck was parked under a tree. It was a work vehicle, not a luxury one, its body scratched and covered in the same red clay that permeated everything. Silas opened the door for his daughter and then walked around to the driver's side. Oliver expected them to simply drive off, leaving him there in the dark. It would have been a fitting end to his intrusion, but Silas paused, his hand on the door handle, and looked at him over the roof of the truck. "Get in," he said, his voice neutral. "It's a long walk back to town in the dark." Oliver hesitated. Getting into that truck felt like crossing a threshold from which there would be no return, but the alternative was the loneliness of the dark road. He climbed into the back seat, the smell of leather and earth enveloping him. The drive back was not to the town. Silas took a secondary dirt road that Oliver hadn't noticed before. They drove for about 10 minutes, the path lit only by headlights cutting through the Appalachian darkness. Oliver reflected on how useless all his knowledge was. He knew how to calculate the ROI of complex financial instruments, understood the fluctuations of the stock market, yet he had no idea how to navigate the simple, terrifying terrain of a family's sorrow. Finally, wooden gates opened onto a ranch house, a sprawling single-story structure with a wraparound porch. It wasn't an ostentatious mansion, but a home that exuded solidity and history. An elderly housekeeper met them at the door, glancing at Oliver with curiosity, but asking no questions. "Set another place at the table for our guest," Silas ordered, the word guest coming out with difficulty. Dinner was the longest, most silent meal of Oliver's life. The food was simple and plentiful, but every bite felt like it weighed a ton. Helena barely touched her plate, her eyes lost somewhere on the wall. Silas ate methodically, but his gaze would land on Oliver from time to time, an assessing, unreadable look. When the meal was over, Helena stood. "Excuse me, I'm tired." She retreated without looking at either of them. Oliver and Silas were left alone at the large, solid wood table. The silence was different now, charged with a waiting tension. "You came all this way for forgiveness," Silas said finally, breaking the silence. "I don't know if I can give you that. What you did was expose my own foolishness." "I'm sorry for everything," Oliver repeated sincerely. Silas shook his head, waving away the apology. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Oliver's, their intensity pinning him to his chair. Her fiancé, his name is Richard. He arrives tomorrow. He paused, letting the information sink in. I want you to meet him. I want you to look at him with your city eyes, your understanding of business and appearances. The proposition was so unexpected, so bizarre, that Oliver was speechless. I want you to look at him, Silas continued, his voice low and sharp, and tell me if you see the same man you used to be. Silas's proposition hung in the dining room like smoke, dense and suffocating. Oliver felt the world tilt on a strange, unexpected axis. He had come to the mountains of North Carolina seeking absolution for his ego, a way to rewrite his own humiliation. Now, he was being drafted to serve as judge and jury for someone else's drama, to be the expert on a character flaw he had only just begun to recognize in himself. The irony was so crushing, it bordered on the absurd. I don't know if I can do that, Oliver stammered, his honesty catching him by surprise. I'm not the right person to judge anyone. That's exactly why you're the perfect person, Silas retorted, his voice sharp. You know the smell of empty ambition. You know how to recognize a man who looks at a woman and sees a deal, an asset to be acquired. I'm blinded by the desire to see my daughter happy, and maybe blinded by my own guilt. He offered no further explanation. He simply stood and led Oliver to a simple but impeccably clean guest room at the back of the house. The night for Oliver was a long, waking delirium. Lying in bed, he listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the Appalachian night, the distant croak of a frog, the buzz of an insect, the whisper of wind in the dry leaves. They were sounds of life, organic and real, that contrasted with the sterile silence of his Los Angeles high-rise, where the only sound was the electronic hum of his investments growing. He thought of Helena, of her bottled-up sorrow. He thought of Richard, the fiancé he hadn't yet met, but already hated for representing the ghost of himself. How could he look at this man and not see his own reflection? The man who measured the value of everything in dollars and cents, who saw relationships as transactions and love as an unnecessary luxury. The next morning arrived with a clear, tiki, merciless light. Breakfast was another silent ritual, but this time the tension was palpable. Helena was present, but she seemed like a shadow of her former self. She barely looked up from her plate, and Oliver could feel the waves of anxiety emanating from her. Silas, for his part, was impassive, a rock of determination, but his eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside. Around 10 o'clock, the sound of an engine more powerful than Silas's old pickup approached on the dirt road. Oliver, who was on the porch pretending to read a book, felt his stomach clench. A luxury SUV, impeccably clean despite the dust, pulled up in front of the house. The driver's door opened and out stepped Richard. He was exactly as Oliver had imagined, tall, with a country club tan and a smile that looked like it had been designed by a marketing expert. He wore designer clothes that tried to look casual, a linen shirt, khaki trousers, and expensive shoes clearly not made for red clay. Richard greeted Silas with a hug that felt more like a formal handshake. Silas, my friend, good to see you. The ranch is looking beautiful as ever, an enviable asset. His eyes scanned the property with a gleam of appraisal, calculating the value of the acres, the quality of the livestock, the profit potential. Silas introduced Oliver succinctly. Richard, this is Oliver, an acquaintance from L.A. Richard gave Oliver a quick glance, a social scan that catalogued and dismissed him as irrelevant in less than a second. It was the same look, the same cold, instant judgment that Oliver had cast upon Silas in his boutique. To feel it on his own skin was like touching a live wire. A wave of shame and anger washed over him. Then, Richard turned to Helena, his smile widening in a practiced display of affection. My dear, you look more beautiful every day. He approached, holding a velvet box from a famous Parisian brand. "I brought you a little something to make up for the gift your father couldn't manage to buy." He opened the box, revealing a heavy, ostentatious diamond necklace, a piece that screamed wealth but had not a spark of soul. With a possessive gesture, he moved to place the jewel around her neck. "So that everyone knows you're the most valuable woman in the world." In that moment, Helena flinched. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but one that stopped Richard mid-gesture. His smile faltered, confusion turning into a flicker of annoyance. And in the tense silence, Helena's eyes, green and desperate, met Oliver's across the porch, a silent appeal that crossed space and time, asking for a rescue he did not know how to perform. Helena's silent plea shot across the yard and hit Oliver like a physical force. In that instant, he was no longer a spectator. Her pain, Richard's arrogance, Silas's anguish, it all converged on that point. The epicenter of the emotional earthquake about to devastate the ranch's facade of peace. Richard, sensing Helena's resistance, let the practiced smile die on his lips. A shadow of irritation crossed his perfectly tanned face. "Helena, darling, what is it?" "It's just a gift. The least one can expect in a union that will consolidate such a significant portfolio." The word portfolio was said with a reverence he had not dedicated to his fiancée. It was the spark in the tinderbox. Helena took a step back, her entire body trembling, but her eyes no longer held a plea. There was a new light in them, the light of a dam finally breaking. "I can't, Richard," she said, her voice low but resonating with a finality that silenced everyone. "I can't wear this necklace, and I can't marry you." Richard's jaw dropped. He looked to Silas, expecting the old patriarch to intervene, to scold his daughter for her lapse in business sense. But Silas remained motionless, his face a stone mask, his eyes fixed on the scene, absorbing every word, every gesture. "What are you talking about?" Richard hissed, the veneer of civility cracking. "Don't be ridiculous. Our marriage is a done deal. Our families have an agreement. The stocks, the assets, it's all intertwined. You can't just walk away from the profit we stand to make together." He said the word profit as if it were a sacred vow, and with it he revealed everything. There was no love, no partnership, only cash flow, an investment, an inheritance to be leveraged. Oliver tasted the bitter recognition in his own mouth. That was him. That was the man he had been just a few days ago. The man who saw the world as an Excel spreadsheet. Richard, realizing he had lost control, turned his fury on the only anomaly in the equation, Oliver. "And you," he snarled, pointing an accusatory finger. "Who the hell are you, anyway? You show up out of nowhere. What did you do to her?" Before Oliver could answer, before he could even think, the words simply came, born of his own painful epiphany. "He didn't do anything," Oliver said, his voice calm and steady, surprising himself. He stepped forward, out of the porch shadow and into the sunlight. "I'm just a man who learned the hard way that the most expensive things in the world are often the ones with the least value." Oliver's gaze wasn't on Richard, but on Silas. It was a message, a testimony. He was the ghost of this union's future, the living proof of the bankruptcy of that way of life. Richard looked at him with pure disdain. "What cheap philosophy! What does a nobody like you know about value?" It was the last straw. Silas, who had been a statue until then, moved. He walked down the porch steps and stood beside his daughter, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. He looked at Richard, and for the first time, there was no conflict in his eyes, only a cold, absolute clarity, the clarity of a man who had finally seen the truth. "Mr. Croft is right," Silas said, his voice quiet but with the resonant authority of the Emerald King. "He understands that my daughter's happiness is not listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and that your love, Richard, pays no dividends. It is a worthless fund." He paused, the silence becoming deafening. "Our deal is off." The door you came in is still open. Please, use it." Humiliation transformed Richard's face. He looked from Silas to Helena and finally to Oliver, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. Without a word, he turned, got into his luxury SUV and sped away, kicking up a cloud of red dust that hung in the air like the ghost of a broken future. On the porch, the three remained in silence, the sound of the engine fading in the distance. The crisis had passed. The fiancé was gone, but in the calm that followed the storm, they found themselves in a completely new and unknown territory, united by an act of rebellion that had changed the course of their lives forever. The cloud of dust kicked up by Richard's car settled slowly, returning the landscape to its usual tranquility. The silence that remained was not awkward, but contemplative, the silence that follows a great purging. The air seemed cleaner, the sunlight more honest. Helena stepped forward, out from under her father's protective arm, and walked to the edge of the porch. She took a deep breath, as if tasting the air of freedom for the first time. A small smile, the first Oliver had seen on her, touched her lips. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice still trembling but full of a gratitude that went beyond words. Silas approached her, his eyes misty. "You should have told me, child. I should have listened." "You listen now," she replied, turning to him. "That's what matters." They embraced, a hug that healed years of misunderstandings and silences. It was no longer the billionaire and his heiress, but just a father and daughter finding each other again. Oliver watched the scene from a distance, feeling both a part of it and a complete stranger. He had been the catalyst, the stone in the shoe that caused the avalanche. But now, with the conflicts resolved, his presence seemed redundant. He was a man from Los Angeles, from Rodeo Drive. His world of marble and glass awaited him. He cleared his throat, a discreet sound to announce his intention to leave. I think it's time for me to go." Father and daughter broke their embrace and turned to him. Silas's gaze, once hard and suspicious, was now one of reluctant respect. "You don't have to rush off," he said, his voice hoarse. "Stay for lunch. It's the least I can do." Oliver stayed. Lunch was the opposite of the previous night's dinner. The tension had dissipated, replaced by light conversation. They talked about the land, about the drought, about the town's stories. Helena, free from the weight of the engagement, seemed like a different person. She laughed, told stories of her childhood on the ranch, and her green eyes sparkled with a life Oliver didn't know existed. During the conversation, Oliver spoke about his grandfather, the artisan. He shared the stories he'd read in the old notebook, about his grandfather's passion, not for stones as an investment, but as time capsules, each one holding the history of millions of years of the earth. Silas listened with deep attention. "Your grandfather was a wise man," he said. "He understood that true wealth isn't what you take from the earth, but what you understand about it." After lunch, Silas asked Oliver to accompany him to a small shed behind the house. The place was a workshop, filled with lapidary tools, some old, some modern. In the center was a heavy wooden workbench. Silas picked up a metal box and placed it on the bench. He opened it, revealing not the giant, raw emeralds from the suitcase, but smaller stones of a delicate green, already cut with exquisite care. "I learned to cut stones myself," Silas confessed, almost shyly. "My wife, Helena's mother, she loved the stones, but not the big ones, the ones worth a fortune. She liked the small ones, the ones you just find by chance. It said they were secrets the earth told only to us." He picked up one of the stones, a small green heart. "I was going to give Helena a necklace I made with these stones, but I got carried away with the idea that she needed something grand. I thought my simple work wasn't enough." In that confession, Oliver saw the root of the whole problem, a father's insecurity, the fear of not being enough for his daughter, masked by a display of power and wealth. A feeling so human, so far from the mythical Emerald King. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Oliver said, and it was the truth. That small emerald heart, made by a father's hands, held more value than all the jewels in his boutique. Silas took the small stone heart and placed it in Oliver's hand. "Take it with you," he said, "as a reminder of what has real value." Oliver closed his hand around the stone. It was warm from the sun coming through the workshop window. It was more than a stone. It was a symbol of his journey, his transformation. Later, as he was preparing to leave, Helena found him on the porch. "Are you going back to Los Angeles?" she asked. "It's where I belong," he replied, though the phrase sounded less convincing now. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, "for showing me I wasn't alone in my prison. I think we were both in the same cell, just in different prisons," he replied with a half smile. Silas insisted on driving him back to town in his pickup. The journey was silent but comfortable. As they said goodbye in front of the inn, Silas extended his hand. "If you ever find yourself back in Cutter's Gap, my door is open to you." Oliver shook the man's hand, a gesture that sealed not a business deal, but a deep understanding. As he walked into the inn, he knew the story didn't end here. He had found the forgiveness he sought, but he had gained something much greater, a new perspective. He was no longer just the owner of a luxury jewelry boutique. He was a man who carried a small emerald heart in his pocket, and the memory that a person's greatest asset is not measured in gold or Bitcoin, but in the connections they build and the courage to admit when they are wrong. The journey back to Los Angeles was a transition between separate realities. The plane ascended, leaving behind the red clay country and its infinite sky, and plunged into the sea of clouds hiding the concrete anthill below. Every mile traveled pulled him away from the man he had become in Cutter's Gap and pushed him closer to the ghost of the man he had been. Landing at LAX, the shock was immediate. The cool air, the incessant noise, the hurry on people's faces, everything that was once his natural habitat now seemed aggressive and alien. He no longer saw power and ambition in those corridors. He saw an empty urgency, a race with no finish line. When he walked into his Rodeo Drive boutique, the cold marble seemed to suck the warmth from his body. The carefully engineered silence of the space brought him no peace, but a sense of sterile loneliness. The jewels, behind their armored glass, looked like lifeless artifacts, symbols of a wealth he now understood to be the poorest kind of all. Laura, the saleswoman, saw him enter and her eyes widened. He did not look like the same man. There was a calm in his shoulders, an absence of the arrogant tension that had always defined him. He walked up to her and for the first time looked her in the eye as an equal. "Laura," he said, his voice gentle, "I'd like to apologize to you and the entire team for my arrogance, for the way I've treated you all these years. That's gonna change." The sincerity in his voice left her speechless. That day, Oliver didn't lock himself in his office to analyze cash flow or the performance of his investments. Instead, he went down to the storeroom and, under dusty tarps, found what he was looking for: his grandfather's old workbench, his tools, his notebooks. He had it brought up to the center of the boutique, replacing one of the main display cases. The staff watched, bewildered, as he cleaned the worn wood and arranged the small tools with a newfound reverence. He had spent his entire life focused on increasing his net worth, on turning capital into more money. Now he realized that the greatest treasure he possessed was the inheritance of knowledge and passion he had scorned. He began to redesign the concept of his business. No longer would he sell luxury for luxury's sake. He would create pieces with history, with soul. He would use smaller stones, but with unique personalities, and tell the story of where they came from, of the hands that pulled them from the earth. His focus would no longer be on exorbitant profit, but on creating something that connected people, that marked real moments, not just status. His fortune would no longer be measured in dollars or euros, but in the beauty he could bring to the world. That night, alone in the silent boutique, Oliver sat at his grandfather's workbench. He took the small emerald heart Silas had given him from his pocket. Under the lamplight, the stone pulsed with a soft, green life. It wasn't worth the building, or even a month's rent on his store, but it held the weight of a journey, the lesson of humility, the promise of a new